Hello everybody, good evening. Welcome to the first Babylon Green Party gathering of 2009. Yay! Yay! This is actually kicking off what I consider our 100 Days series. We're planning on hitting a whole bunch of issues that will probably affect the next presidency, one of which will be immigration. We have some others coming up, including somebody from Veterans Against the War who will be speaking about Iraq and Afghanistan. I can let people know more about what's coming up if they like. But tonight's speaker is somebody we've been working with for a while. She's a wonderful person. She's doing great work with Long Island Wins, which is an immigration organization that's come out on the scene the last couple of years and has really been out there helping to organize things and to get a message to a larger audience about what the realities are in terms of economics and population, rather than just what people's beliefs are, so that they have information in order to make decisions. Kirby's one of the people who's been doing a lot of that work.
All right, hey everybody. My name is Kirby Einhorn. I am the communications director for Long Island Wins. I also do a lot of the outreach for the organization. Long Island Wins is a relatively new organization, and we were started by a bunch of the different immigration organization advocates on Long Island. Places like the Workplace Project, Corazon, the Long Island Immigrant Alliance, Catholic Charities, a lot of the people out there who are doing the direct services to the immigrant community. Well, they got together and they said, politicians in the media are always talking about immigration, and they're always doing so on a fairly negative tone. They're doing that because they believe that the crowds, the masses, are fairly also negative about immigration themselves, have negative views about immigrants, and don't really want immigrants in their communities. Well, the founders of my organization said that can't possibly be true. Let's put a poll out into the field. Lo and behold, it was the truth. Public opinion is overwhelmingly negative when you're talking about immigration. So thus our communications campaign was founded. So we do education to local community organizations, all in the hopes of sort of creating new advocates and putting out new positive media, which talks about, practical ways that we can deal with immigration issues. The first thing that we did is this study that's sitting on the table right here. It's like Ian said, we try and put out the cold hard facts. How are immigrants, where are they settled on Long Island? Yeah, feel free to pass them around. Sure, I'll hold one for the camera. So, how are immigrants settling on Long Island, and how are they impacting the local economy? It's not such, sexy information, but if you're going to talk about immigration, it's vital. Our studies have found conclusively that immigrants are positive economic forces on Long Island. Not only that, without new immigration to the island, we'd be experiencing a negative population growth. I'm sure you've all heard of the brain drain. Younger people are leaving Long Island, and immigrants are coming and replacing both, the workforce and just the general population. It really just shows how immigrants are revitalizing communities where people are leaving in droves. Let's think about Brentwood. What was Brentwood 20 years ago? What is it today? That's just one example. So, I want to talk a little bit about facts and figures. You can find all this again in the Adelphi study, which you should feel free to take. But the study has shown that immigrants are both contributing to the tax base and to their local communities. We're talking about $10.6 billion in total buying power. $10.6 billion to begin with is a little bit unfathomable for me. But if you think about $10.6 billion getting up and leaving the Long Island economy, we'd be in a far worse off place than we are even in this economic recession. So that's one important number. And then the other important number, which counters, a lot of the accusations that anti-immigrant folks will throw out there, is that immigrants are not contributing to the tax base. Well, our study, which is based on census data does not, document whether or not a person has legal status in the United States or not. So based off of census data, immigrants are contributing a net benefit, which is what we were talking about a little earlier, that after, their expenses to the county, after their expenses in education, after the expenses in healthcare, after the expenses in corrections, immigrants are contributing over $1 billion to the tax base. Again, what if $1 billion got up and left the Long Island economy? It would be huge, not to mention, the fact that immigrants are workers, contributors in a lot of different ways. So what we've seen is that there's been a really big change in the face of Long Island demographics. I said that without immigrants, we'd be losing a lot of people on Long Island, but since 1980, the immigrant population has more than doubled here on Long Island. Can anyone guess how many immigrants we have out here? Just throw out a guess.
500,000.
Damn! Wow, good one. Yeah, we have just under 500,000 immigrants on Long Island, compared to 250,000 in 1980. That's 16% of the total Long Island population. That's a huge segment of the population was not born in this country. It's incredible. But what it means is that the face of Long Island is literally changing. It's browning because over half of the immigrants on Long Island are Latinos. So Long Island has had, this is sort of transitioning into the policy aspect of things. Long Island has had, a bit of trouble dealing with this change. Nassau County was the first to experience this sort of influx of immigrants and have created a lot of policies and a lot of practices that help communities integrate in ways that Suffolk County is sort of just coming on the bandwagon with. I think sort of a perfect example of this is what just recently happened in Patchogue. In the last 5 years, the Patchogue high school student population went from being about 4% immigrant, or I'm actually not sure if it's immigrant or Latino, to being over 20% immigrant or Latino. As recently as November, when the hate crime happened there, the superintendent of the Patchogue School District said there is no racism in our schools, and yet they could not really identify, and yet categorically said there is no racism here, but yet could not really identify ways in which the two communities were coming together, the native-born community and the immigrant community. Can you imagine if we just dumped, a new segment of the population in an area and did nothing to sort of help them learn how to adjust to their new location, as well as, work with the existing population there to increase understanding between the two groups? That's essentially what's happening in Suffolk County. It's resulted in a variety of things, fear and hate are one of them in the sort of more abstract sense, but in the actual, literal legislative sense, we have a lot of politicians out there who are talking about immigration, and I'm going to use the word impractical again, impractical ways. Immigration legislation, or immigration is legislated on the national level, the federal level. Our sort of failed immigration system, our broken immigration system, is the fault of national government. Under the Bush administration, there were 3 different efforts to reform the immigration system, none of which passed. The only thing that continued to, be pushed through were increased spending for enforcement. Enforcement is never going to work. And I say that because immigration is not a cut and dry situation. There are a lot of sort of gray areas. But mostly immigrants move because of economic situations. And I wanted to ask this question in the beginning, but how many people here can sort of trace their family history back to immigrants? Can I see anyone? Yeah, anyone came over on the Mayflower? Anyone? No. Even the Mayflower was immigrants, so what are you going to do? So literally, the American dream is continuing. And not only that, immigrant generations today are the same as, our grandparents or our great-grandparents were immigrating here for more opportunity for their family, regardless of what, the situation is in their country of origin. So going back 2 steps, immigration is federally legislated. We have a situation right now where we have 12 million people with no legal status, no legal rights, no workers' protection, no health care living in this country. How many buses do you think it would take to get 12 million people out of the country? Could anyone? I don't know the answer.
500,000.
Maybe. Really, it's just an impractical solution. What we need to figure out are ways to provide, legal status and securities to the people who are living here and to reunite them with their families, which they can no longer sort of join with because we now have a wall going through some of the places where people used to cross. So again, the Bush administration didn't accomplish immigration reform. What they did accomplish was more enforcement spending. We don't know what Obama will do yet. He has said, immigration is in his top 5 priorities, but whether or not he's going to spend political capital on this very dangerous issue, we don't really know yet. I say it's dangerous
Not in his
because...
first term.
Yeah, well, who knows? We're going to see. We're definitely going to see.
He's got that capital, he's got to keep it to get reelected. Then in the second term, we'll address it.
I think we got it on camera, so I'll check back with you in the next election. So again, the federal government has failed us on that level, leaving us with a lot of problems on the local level. The problems being that, people need housing, people need healthcare, people gotta work, gotta eat, do all sorts of different things, and they're continuing to do that, again, with no legal protections. What our local government, what our local police forces have done is tried to step up and, fill the job of the federal government, but they can't. They do not have the jurisdiction to create immigration reform. What they do have the jurisdiction to do is push people further underground, make them more fearful, which is what has, I'm going to generalize a little bit, what we've seen, and this is what we've seen happen in Suffolk County. I'm going to talk a little bit about Nassau County, which I said was experiencing immigration before Suffolk County. They've done a lot of great things, like have community meetings with their police force so that no one is afraid to come and report a crime, so that people know that both government and the enforcement side, the police, are again working for them because they are residents here, they're paying taxes here, they're working, they're raising families here. They've created an organization called CASA, which is a governmental organization which works to provide English as a second language classes, which works to help immigrants when they want to start new businesses, which helps new immigrants understand that, again, that government is there for them and is working for them and for their benefit. What I can say for Suffolk County is that between March of '08 and August of '08, there were 4 different pieces of legislation which worked to penalize immigrants, to, again, push them further underground, make them afraid of government, and separate them from the native-born community. Just what I've seen in my sort of limited time living, working on Long Island. So, I said that Patchogue was sort of a microcosm of what we can see that's going on in the larger immigration debate. If you Google, immigration policies, Long Island is one of the maybe 5 to 10 communities that has really experienced a heated immigration debate on the local level. You think of border states like Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. You don't think of Long Island as having such a heated immigration debate, but we do, because Long Island has been, has had difficulty dealing with the change that immigration has brought. Not only that, we have politicians, we have the media, Lou Dobbs being from Long Island. Wait, is it Lou Dobbs or Bill O'Reilly, Lisa?
Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly, there you go. He is one of the 3 biggest talking heads, who's constantly spewing negative statements about immigration, generally untrue statements, if you check organizations like Media Matters. So, Long Island, again, is trying to put out some new positive media. We have a blog, we have the immigration study, but it's just not enough. We need a cohesive, powerful, group, cohesive and powerful in the fact that our numbers would be great, movement to make change here. So I'm going to sort of open it up for questions. How do we count people, in the more general sense of who is here and how they got here? To come from a country south of the border, how many years do you think it would take to get your to become a U.S. citizen?
Or from anywhere in the world.
Well, let's talk for a specific, because it's different for everywhere in the world, which is why I'm making that distinction. South of the border, how many years? 3 years? Guess again.
15.
What about you? You guessed so well before. I mean, Ian just beat you to it, so I'm going to cut you off. It's 15 years.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm impressed with your guessing skills. So it takes 15 years for someone, Mexico, South America, Central America, to get legal citizenship. If I need a job, if I need to put food on the table, how long do you think I'm going to wait? A day? 2 days? How many days can you live without food? Not that many. It's literally sort of impossible to get legal status as, to get a work visa, to get your citizenship. It's incredibly difficult. Even a lot of people will talk about guest worker programs, which were made, for employers who cannot find, sources of employees. It's incredibly difficult to use. They have to prove that they can't find employees. How do you prove that you can't find employees? Well, you say, I've posted in all of the local papers. I've, gone out and I've done the sincere recruiting. But again, how long does it take to prove? How long does it take to process? These systems are not working for people who want to come to the U.S.
And I think that one part of enforcement that I think can work, and that has definitely been lacking in the last 8 years, was against corporations that hire undocumented immigrants. Because a lot of people will say, these undocumented immigrants are taking all our jobs, when really the people they should be blaming are not the immigrants, but the people who hire them. And I think that
actually, one of those pieces of legislation I talked about in Suffolk County was what it did pass, was that the county government wanted to talk to the contractors that they worked with, not that they wanted to talk, that they wanted to find contractors who were found to have hired undocumented immigrants. There was just a release that was passed in 2006 originally, and so far only one company has been prosecuted, and they were found to, and they paid a $2,000 fine. I think that there are some benefits to punishing employees, but there are also employers, but there are also a lot of negatives. It will turn companies against each other. It will increase competition for who can hire the cheapest labor that is or can be proved documented. A lot of times these systems that they use to prove whether or not the employees are documented are faulty, because if you have fake identification, it doesn't turn up in their online systems, one of which is E-Verify, which was another proposal that was tried to pass here. So I hear what you're saying, and I definitely think that corporations need to be more responsible in how they treat their employees. Long Island Winds advocates for increased workplace rights for all workers, so that regardless of your documentation, you get health benefits and all of the other benefits that you'd like, as well as a living wage. Something we need to work for. A lot of unions don't recruit immigrants specifically, but there are some that do, and they're really great. SEIU is one example. Do you have a question?
I just want to make a comment on it, because again, it's like anti-immigrant. A lot of people are more anti the illegal immigrants, not anti-immigrant. So I just don't appreciate when people say that, like put it all into, oh, you're anti-immigrant because you're against the illegal immigrants, as opposed to you're against everybody. When they put it into a comment, like it's a big difference.
Well, see, and that's one of the frameworks I think that we need to struggle against, because again, immigration is not cut and dry. You're not pro-immigrant or you're anti-immigrant.
Right.
Long Island Winds, we don't identify in either way. What we say is we want practical solutions that can work for everyone, and we believe that these things exist. If we had an immigration system that responded to our economic needs or the needs of other countries, when they're in crisis, that would be practical.
The one thing that, and it's usually in the more extreme cases where you see, where yes, there is an actual anti-immigrant movement. They see a Latino, and they automatically believe that they are undocumented. Bottom line, they think they are the scum of the earth. We've faced it time and time again at Suffolk legislature. As a matter of fact, I was told to go back to my own country, and I was born and raised in Sable, and I'm the third generation on both sides. I wouldn't even know where to go back to.
I think there's a perception today that you can easily identify who is an immigrant and who is an undocumented immigrant, without, again, asking for them to whip out their papers. This is sort of, these sort of discriminations against legal and illegal immigrants have existed, back to the time when Ben Franklin was saying that Italians were dirty. But what we can see now is that the majority of immigrants are visibly different, whereas previous generations were generally white, though people thought they could distinguish, where you were from. Being that there is this visual difference, I think the confusion that Lisa was talking about is far more pervasive than ever before.
Seems like most of the focus is on what's going on with immigrants once they get here, rather than the reason that they felt it necessary to move here from where they were living before, and what the role of the United States government and the United States corporations were in creating that environment that cause them to need their homelands, and perhaps if people were more aware of that, they'd be more sympathetic toward them. But during all the debates, I was shocked when I actually heard Barack Obama, in I think it was the last debate, mention the death squad attacks on union organizers in Colombia, and said that's why he had a problem with supporting Colombia. But that was like the only time I've ever heard that mentioned anywhere on mainstream TV or in any of the debates or anything.
I definitely agree with you that we need to think about what the causes and again what drives people to leave their country and come to another place. But again, if we look at sort of the history behind this, is that there have always been pushes and pulls for immigration. Perhaps now we're dealing with U.S. Foreign policy that causes more immigration, but the fact remains that Americans are generally concerned, again, generally, with what is right in front of our faces, right happening in our communities. Again, Long Island is experiencing some of the most heated political debate about immigration in the country because we have experienced this huge influx of immigrants. So we're dealing with it, again, very local, very personal level. Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head in that the complaint generally between one group and the other is they're taking my, what I am entitled to, or they are, taking the space that was mine, or, it's a sort of always a battle for resources. And what I think that we have, again, tried to show with this economic study is that immigrants being such hard workers, being so driven, being so entrepreneurial, so determined to succeed, having left their country, are always going to be a strong economic force here. The other thing that I wanted to say was my thing of who would have thought it would be Long Island was not, the reaction that immigration has inspired, but the fact that people are immigrating to Long Island. And there are very specific reasons I think that we can, identify this area has had experienced a boom in immigration. That is, that the baby boomer generation out here is growing, to their silver-haired years, and there's a great demand for social services, like restaurants, like healthcare, industries where immigrants can fill these gaps and really succeed. Not only that, we're situated next to the, immigrant sort of capital of the country, which is New York. And so it's sort of just traveled out to the island over the years.
One thing that I've found that is central to the whole debate that I feel doesn't get discussed enough. I mean, for myself, I don't feel like I have enough knowledge to actively engage someone on the issue. And if you could also touch on briefly on what Winds's position is as well, just to get an idea of what your organization, how your organization is it supposed to look like how Pax Christi or say Carrison or there's other local organizations doing local work feel on issues? What is basically the difference between, just in layman's street terms, between what is a documented, what is an undocumented, what is an illegal, what isn't illegal? Because when debates are couched on the street, people aren't saying, "Oh, they're illegal," "Oh, they're legal." They don't make any distinction. They just see skin color.
Right. On the two different sides of the debate, if you're going to split it pro-immigrant and anti-immigrant, one side of the debate uses undocumented and the other side uses illegal. The pro-immigrant debate will tell you that to call someone illegal is dehumanizing, and how can any person, be illegal just by their very own nature? To be undocumented is to be a person that doesn't have papers in this country. There's
That's what I
also
was trying to touch on.
and there's also a situation called out of status, which is people who came to this country with some sort of legal documentation, but that status ran out and they haven't gone back to or gone on to another country or left. And you also asked about, sort of what is the Long Island Wins platform. The basis of our platform is that there can be a win-win situation here. That's where our name comes from. That our country can both be prosperous and continue to have record high numbers of immigrants coming here. It can be a prosperous situation for everyone. Some of the things that we need to ensure that it is a prosperous situation for everyone is ESL, increased English as a second language opportunities for all people who come into the U.S. We need to make sure that we can all speak the same language. A worker cannot advance if they don't speak English, and an employer cannot get as much production out of each employee if they cannot, again, communicate with each other. So that's one very concrete way that a policy can be a win-win situation. Again, I also mentioned that if we were to sort of think about national immigration reform on an ideal level, it would respond to the economic needs of our country. You know, it would have to be very fast acting, it would have to process a lot better than it does currently, but I think a lot of people say that that would be ideal. Again, back to terminology, beater jumping. It is a term to, Lisa, do you want to explain this one?
Beaner jumping is going out and fighting Mexicans and beating them up. Specifically Mexicans is when it started. And they went out to find Mexicans.
I think what
they found an Ecuadorian, assuming he was Mexican.
And I think what really is crazy about the situation in Patchogue is that this was regular practice, that it was, you know, known amongst the friends of these kids, you know, that sometimes people got beat up, sometimes there were home invasions. And not only that, but the situation in Brooklyn and one of the kids out in Patchogue, you know, not everyone who committed these attacks were white. So it's not just, you know, white people against brown people or black people, but it's people in general, like I said, talking about sort of the struggle to rise to the top that has sort of made immigrants the victim of a lot of these attacks. Really, it's brought to light for a lot of people issues that have been going on in Long Island for quite a while. Marcelo Lucero was a 38-year-old man who had been in this country for 18 years. He was, at the time of his death, working at a dry cleaner's. He was described as an incredibly hard worker. In fact, most of his life was dedicated to work. He went out walking one evening with a friend around midnight in Patchogue, also by the railroad station. He and the friend were what is now called a lynching, because it was a group of angry folks, an angry mob, got together and started beating up Marcelo and his friend. His friend got away. Marcelo, the fatal sort of act was a stab by one of the kids, a 17-year-old. There were 7 kids that night, 6 of whom were white. And all of whom were high school aged. This happened on midnight of, or around midnight of November 8th. I see it as being precipitated by a lot of negative rhetoric in both the media and the local legislature, and by the fact that this school, which had a dramatic increase in the Hispanic population, did very little to work to sort of not accommodate, but adjust to the difference in its community, to, you know, educational programs. And it's a lot of it, I think, comes down to communication, if you're talking on the town level, between the parents of students and the school district or the school board or teachers in the school themselves. One of the biggest things, again, I mentioned from, you know, immigrants having increased prosperity is the language barrier. Well, with the language barrier, you also can't communicate to people your needs or you know, what's going on in a situation. If you talk to the principal of Patchogue High School, you know, he'll say that he had tried to do some sort of investigating, talking to teachers and talking to students about what's going on, and he said that the, you know, majority of what's going on is just sort of little bullying, which you can't really solve with, you know, direct punishment. You can only solve through education, I think. I think what Patchogue has also really brought to light, again, is that Long Island, Suffolk County specifically, is experiencing, you know, vast waves of immigration and not putting into place practices that will help communities deal with this. Again, this is all because we have a rhetoric that's being used demonizing immigrants. Again, you can't really distinguish upon, you know, meeting someone face to face whether or not they have documentation or not. So it's translated into a hatred, a fear, and anger towards the Latino community.
Because my parents were political actually, that's how it says. And the assistant, the class was particularly rowdy that day, and it was an ESL class. So the assistant principal came in, and he started yelling and screaming and calling us trash. And he said, "You're all trash. We have enough trash of our own in this country, and we really don't need you to do this and create problems."